So, we spent some time talking about the difference between human language and animal communication. And last class we looked at Charles Hockett's 16 design features, and we narrowed in on just a few of those. Do you remember any of those which were of particular importance? So features that are really important for distinguishing between communication with animals and human language.
The sound that represents an idea has no bearing on what the idea is.
Perfect. And do you remember what that was called?
Something about morphology.
Anyone else?
Arbitrary.
Arbitrary. Perfect. But you got the concept, that's the most important thing. Yeah. So that's one of the four that we focused on.
Displacement.
Displacement. What is displacement?
That we can talk about things that aren't here in the moment, or that were here but are no longer here.
Perfect. So displaced in space and time. So arbitrariness, displacement.
Semanticity.
Semanticity, and what was that?
This is if I can have a fixed meaning, so if it wasn't the
Yeah, and if you think when a dog barks, it's unlikely that each individual bark you can tell, another dog can tell specifically what each bark refers to. One bark refers to a table, one bark refers to a computer. Chances are it's not true. And then
Productivity.
productivity. What is productivity?
Taking a finite number of sounds and making an infinite number of utterances.
Yeah, and it's really quite remarkable. So English has about 46 different what are called phonemes. A language like Spanish has about 24. Yet we can use those finite number of sounds and we can make an infinite array of utterances. So that is how we distinguish between animal communication and human language. So now we know what human language is. What is a language and what is a dialect? And that's going to be the topic of today's class. Okay. It is a challenging subject because it's very much to do with politics, very politically driven. You would think it has more to do with linguistics because we're using these linguistic labels. But hopefully by the end of today's class we'll realize that it's a very, very complicated issue. Okay? And that actually the labels, language and dialect are not really that useful from a linguistic standpoint. So what I would like you to do is take a minute or so and discuss with the person next to you. What do you think, if someone were to ask you, what is a language and what is a dialect, and how would you distinguish between the two? What sorts of explanations would you come up with? And I'm not expecting you to know the answer, that's why we have today's lecture, but I just want to kind of see what your intuition is. Okay, so take a minute or so to discuss what you think the difference between a language and a dialect is.
I feel like
Perfect, and that's a good way of thinking about a hierarchy of language. And within a language, it's like not actual words, they actually hate each other. Malaysia, in reality, linguistically speaking, there's very little difference between two languages, two different languages, but really to talk about more to do with
that makes sense.
politics and actual normal language. Okay, guys. Perfect. So, what types of explanations did we come up with? What is a language and what is a dialect? Just intuitively, what do we think? Someone to ask you, is this a language, is this a dialect, what would you say?
I thought of languages as sort of regional, and if we were to look at dialects, I thought of them as sub-regional. I was thinking, you have everybody across the United States speaking English, but the English that people in California speak would probably be a bit different from the English that people in Louisiana speak.
And that's a really good point to make. So even if you were born in the same region, even if you were born in the same household, everyone speaks differently. Okay, there's what's called an idiolect. Lect just means speech. Think of dialect, idiolect. Just like you can say idiosyncratic, which means an idiosyncrasy of a specific individual. We all have idiolect, which means on an individual level we all speak differently. Which means that there are so many different dialects or varieties of a language. So you have a language like English, and under that you have lots of different varieties of dialects. And those dialects can be geographically dependent, or to do with age difference. Okay, maybe you are also education, right? So your education level may affect the way that you speak, and then therefore you may speak differently to someone else with a lower education level. Even people who have, let's just hypothetically say that everyone has one dialect. Even that fluctuates, because there's something called a sociolect, which means that you change the way that you speak according to the social situation. So just think how you speak to your friends, and how you speak at college, and how you speak to someone on the street. Okay, it's not always the same. How you would speak to someone in a job interview, okay, it's different, okay, even within an individual. So variation is everywhere. So we're going to start with something very, very simple, and then we're going to kind of tear it apart and show you how it really isn't that simple. So in linguistics, there is only really one way that we can distinguish between a language and a dialect, and that is what's called mutual intelligibility. So if you want to write that down, you can take notes. Mutual intelligibility. So mutual intelligibility is, well, it refers to the fact that people can or cannot understand each other. And that is kind of a basis of being able, a linguistic basis of being able to differentiate between a language and a dialect. So for instance, if you have a speaker of English who is trying to speak with a speaker of Japanese, assuming they don't speak each other's languages, so they only speak their own native language, they don't understand each other. Okay, they might understand the odd word here or there. Words like coffee are pretty much the same in most languages because they're borrowed. But for the most part, intelligibility is very, very low. Okay, so we talk about mutual intelligibility. There is very low mutual intelligibility in a situation like that. So what that means is that they speak different languages. Okay, so if mutual intelligibility is really low, linguistically speaking, we can say that the speakers are speakers of different languages, like Japanese and English. In contrast to that, if mutual intelligibility is high, we can say that they speak dialects of the same language. Okay, so a very simple but actually quite complex example is a little bit more complex than this. I'm a speaker of British English, most of you are speakers of North American English, and there are notable differences in the way that we speak. Okay? There are phonological differences, lexical differences, we use different words, there are grammatical differences. Yet we can still understand each other, for the most part, right? So mutual intelligibility is high enough that we can say that we speak dialects of a mutual language. Okay? So this is important, this is kind of our basis. So we have mutual intelligibility. If mutual intelligibility is high, we speak dialects or varieties of the same language. If it's low, we can say that they speak different languages. Okay, is this concept clear? Because this is important. Okay? Great. Now I wish we could stop here and just say, great, so we can always just ask this question, and therefore we'll always be able to work out what is a language and what is a dialect. In reality, it's not that simple, because what is considered to be a language and a dialect is more of a socio-political question rather than a linguistic one. In other words, it has more to do with politics and culture than with the actual linguistic form of the language. So we have issues with this definition. There are instances where there are speakers of different languages who actually understand each other. Okay? And it's supposed to be the opposite. If they speak different languages, the mutual intelligibility is supposed to be low. Yet there are instances where speakers of different languages can understand each other for the most part. And we also have the opposite. We also have instances in many languages of the world where we have speakers of what are supposed to be, at least politically, considered to be dialects of the same language, yet they can't understand each other. Okay? You may have even experienced it. I gave that example at the beginning, that you can all understand me and I can all understand you, and that of course is true. But the way that I'm speaking now is different to how I would speak kind of in terms of my vernacular, like back home. If you were to go to Scotland, for example, and you spoke to someone who's not learned standard English, then probably you would have a really hard time communicating with them. Maybe mutual intelligibility would be so low that you could even think that they speak different languages. Okay. So let's talk about these. So the first issue is that there are many instances of people who speak different languages who can actually understand each other. So there are, if you take a speaker of Spanish, they can probably, for the most part, understand a speaker of Italian and a speaker of Portuguese. And if you're a speaker of Portuguese, even more so, you can understand Italian and Spanish. Okay? That mutual intelligibility is relatively high. You don't understand every word, but you can communicate. Okay? It's intelligible what you say. And of course, there's a historical reason for that. Languages like Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese are all Romance languages. And Romance doesn't mean romance, romantic, affection. It refers to the language of the Romans, which was Latin. And the Romans, of course, conquered lots of what we think today as nations within Europe. And with that came the language. Okay, so when you occupy a certain region, a certain, today would be nation, then you end up giving them your language. Okay, but then when Rome fell, you still have Latin spoken all over the place. And without anyone to maintain that, the languages develop and they evolve. Okay? And that's how we get from a language like Latin to lots of languages today like Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese. Okay? And if you look at them on paper, you can see how similar they are. Okay? So at one point in time, they really were just dialects of the same language, but then they evolved so much and they get political status. Okay? So Spain, Spanish. Okay? Portugal, Portuguese. So as we'll see today, often when you have political independence, you also have linguistic independence. Okay? So if you have your own nation, you can pretty much say you have your own language, even though it's not that different. Okay? So that's one example. Another example is with regard to the North Germanic languages. So if you think of Germany and you move north a little bit, where you have Denmark and then you have Norway and Sweden, these are what are called Scandinavian languages. Okay? A speaker of Swedish can understand a speaker of Danish and a speaker of Norwegian. Yet we say that they're different languages. And again, there's a historical reason for this. They really were just one language, which have evolved throughout time. Yet we still have this issue where there is mutual intelligibility, really high mutual intelligibility, so we should really say that they're dialects of the same language. Okay, is everybody with me so far? So, for example, so if you think of Norway and Sweden, those geographical regions were really historically ruled by the Danes, okay? Danish people. And only when Norway and Sweden became independent do we have these different languages. Okay? But just because you draw a political boundary doesn't mean that the linguistic one changes. So, let's see. So Norwegian only became an independent nation in 1814, and that's when we start to see Norwegian as a language. Okay, but it's kind of artificial, right? We're just saying, no, because you have your own nation, you have your own language. Yet linguistically, it's more so dialects of the same language. Okay? So you can kind of think of these languages as one language called Scandinavian, which are divided into different dialects, like Norwegian, Swedish. But of course, politically, we don't say that. Okay? They have political independence, so therefore they speak different languages. And I'm going to give you lots of examples, just to show you how this doesn't really work, and this has more to do with politics and culture than actual linguistics. So, Russian and Ukrainian, okay? If you Google it right now, Russian is its own language, Ukrainian is its own language, okay? But historically, there was a time when Russians just said that people in Ukraine spoke a funny Russian dialect, okay? And when Ukraine became independent, that's when Ukrainian becomes a language, okay? But really, a Russian can, for the most part, understand Ukrainian in the same way that someone from Texas can understand someone from India, okay? Maybe it's a little different, more different than that, maybe there are more differences, but in a similar way that they're really dialects. Hindi and Urdu. So, if you ask people this kind of creates a lot of political tension. Hindi and Urdu, politically speaking, are different languages. Yet they only became different languages when India and Pakistan divided politically, when they became their own independent nations. Okay? So Hindi is spoken in India, and Urdu is spoken in Pakistan. Right? And really, a speaker of Hindi can understand a speaker of Urdu. They really can. Yet they'll say often that they don't understand each other, yet if you look at all the evidence, if you look at all the linguistic forms, you can see how they're genetically related. Often when people say they don't understand each other, it's a little bit like mocking someone, like saying, all people in Britain speak funny, to such an extent that I have no idea what they're saying, yet really if you pay attention you could understand what they're saying. So why do we continue to say that languages like Hindi and Urdu, or why are they different languages? Well, we have culture and we have political boundaries. So Hindi is associated with India and Indian culture, and Urdu is associated with Pakistan and Islam. Okay, so two completely different ideas. Politically, two different the political status is kind of clashing often against each other. And also, just to kind of throw some linguistic stuff in there, they also use a different writing system, okay, which kind of gives you the perception that they speak different languages. But that's a little bit like saying, we write in drops and things. You okay?
No.
Dropped a coffee?
Yeah, it's good.
It's okay. It's a little bit like saying that speakers of... So in English, we use what's called the Roman alphabet, right? A, B, C, D. And it's a little bit like saying, we're going to continue doing this, but some other people are going to use the Cyrillic alphabet, okay, the Russian alphabet. It's still the same language, but we're going to transcribe it in different ways. And that kind of creates the perception that we speak different languages, because we have a different written way of doing that language. Okay, yet in reality, it's really the same. Okay, we're just representing that differently. And that's essentially what's happening with Hindi and Urdu. Then we have situations like Dutch, Flemish, and Afrikaans. Okay, so Dutch you're probably familiar with, spoken in the Netherlands. And then we have Flemish, which is spoken in Belgium. Flemish is really just a different name for Dutch. And we have Afrikaans, which is spoken in South Africa. We have history of colonization, and obviously they brought over what then was Dutch, and it evolved in a somewhat different way. But now we consider them to be different languages, yet speakers can all understand each other. Okay? There are going to be differences in the same way that there are differences between British and American English, but the kind of key point here is that what is considered to be a language and a dialect is often to do with culture and politics, rather than is it really mutual? Is there mutual intelligibility? Okay. Question? Yeah.
Just real quick. What would French Canadian speakers be considered then? Is that a dialect of French, or because Canada is separate from France?
Great question. So you mean like Quebec French in contrast to French?
Like Parisian French?
Yeah. We're going to talk about that. So then we also have the issue of standardization. So again, I go back to this example that I gave at the beginning, which is problematic, saying that British English and American English are really dialects of the same language. Actually, British English has its own standard, and North American English has its own standard. Canadian English has its own standard. So they're what are called pluricentric languages. We're hopefully going to talk a little bit about that today or next class, and we'll definitely get to that question.
Okay.
Another question?
Yeah, you mentioned like Hindi and Urdu have like the same language with different scripts. Is that kind of like encryption at all? Like if you like encrypted the English language?
It would create the impression that, we can understand each other, but if you write down using the Cyrillic alphabet, the Russian alphabet, and I use the Latin alphabet, then it would, to the outside, it would seem that these are different languages. But of course we're speaking the same language, it's just on the page they look different. Yeah.
I've also seen that religion, as you pointed out, has a part to play in it. Like in the former Yugoslavia, a lot of those Orthodox countries, they write their language. Like Serbian and Macedonian, they use Cyrillic. Like Croatia and Slovenia, they write their languages in the Latin script.
Yeah, this is a really, really good point. Again, external factors that we wouldn't think would influence what is considered to be language and dialect really do. Religion, culture, politics, things like that. Yeah. Okay. So now I want to look on the other side. So we've looked at speakers of different languages who can understand each other. Now let's look at languages of dialects of the same language, yet those speakers don't understand each other. Okay. Well, first I need to go through this. A language is a dialect with an army and a navy. Okay, this is a very, very famous quote from Max Fahrenheit. This ties into the idea of what we're talking about. It's more to do with politics and culture rather than linguistics. Okay, whether the languages or the varieties really are mutually intelligible. Okay, so this is really, really an important idea. So the language is a dialect with an army and a navy. What does that mean? If you have your own country, you're politically independent, you have your own language, or at least you can say you have your own language, because it has more to do with politics than anything else. So therefore, what is considered language has more to do with politics, or it's more of a socio-political question rather than a linguistic one. So now let's return to the other side of this issue. So we have speakers of what are supposed to be different dialects, and dialects of the same language, but they can't understand each other. So Chinese is a perfect example of this, and hopefully I can convey this message as well, it's a very, very kind of misunderstood piece of knowledge. We think of Chinese as one language, and if you ask anyone, oh yeah, this person speaks Chinese. That's kind of the layperson definition. Every single linguist knows that Chinese is not a language. Okay, despite the fact that we refer to it as being one language called Chinese, there are many Chinese languages. Okay, which in China they would say are dialects. Okay, so for example we have Mandarin, Cantonese, Taiwanese. Okay, in China, non-linguists would say, oh yeah, they're dialects of Chinese. Okay, just in the same way that British English and American English might be considered dialects of English. Yet, if you take a Mandarin speaker and a Cantonese speaker, and you get them to speak to each other in their native languages, and they don't understand each other. The mutual intelligibility is so low that they really can be considered different languages. Okay? So, we talk about Chinese as a language, and it has multiple dialects. It's actually wrong. There are Chinese languages. Okay? So, Cantonese is its own language, and Mandarin is its own language. This is linguistically speaking, not politically speaking. Okay? In China, the view is that there are these 7 different dialects of Chinese. But of course, linguistically speaking, if you think about mutual intelligibility, it doesn't work. You have a question?
Yeah. So for something like Chinese, like Mandarin and Cantonese, they're not mutually intelligible when they're spoken, right? But don't they share the same script?
Yeah. This is a perfect bit. Yeah. This is where we're going next. Yeah. So why are they considered to be dialects of the same language politically? Precisely for that reason. They speak differently, yet on the page they all write in the same way. Okay, and again that creates the impression that they speak the same language. So I don't speak Mandarin, nor do I speak Chinese, do I speak Cantonese, but if you asked a Cantonese speaker to say something like chair, and you asked a Mandarin speaker to say chair, chances are they would say a completely different word, or a word that you could see are somehow related, but if you didn't know the relationship, you wouldn't know when someone said that word if I was chair. Okay, yet on the page, they all use the same way of representing that. Okay, so that's a really important point. Yeah?
How does that work with languages like Japanese, where there's one language, but it's written differently?
Yeah, so Japanese is its own language. It's actually considered to be... Japanese is a little bit strange. It has its own language family. Not many people really know languages that are related to Japanese. But we'll talk a little bit throughout the semester about rhyming systems. Japanese has at least 3 different... It combines 3 different rhyming systems, so Chinese characters is one of them. So it can become problematic. But I suppose in the same way we could say that most languages in Europe use like the Roman alphabet, right, A, B, C, D. Although we kind of use it in different ways. In Japanese you would have a character which means the same in Japanese and Chinese, yeah, but they will pronounce it completely different. Yeah. Good point. So we talked about the influence of writing. Also, again, politics. people want, China's a big place. They want to kind of feel together, feel nationalism. Okay, and so therefore they say that everyone speaks the same language despite the diversity. Okay, we say that everyone speaks the same language, everyone speaks Chinese because they share the same common history, culture, etc. Okay, so again to do with politics and culture. And moving on to another language, which again we think to be one language, but in reality, linguistically speaking, it's much more complex than that. Arabic. Okay, we like to think of as there being one language called Arabic. Okay, and there being lots of different dialects of Arabic. Right, so Egyptian Arabic and Syrian Arabic. Okay, and we like to think that they're really all just speaking Arabic, but they're all speaking Arabic, but different dialects of Arabic. But in reality, mutual intelligibility is very, very real. You have a question?
Isn't there a standard form of Arabic though that they use on like radio or?
Yeah, just like most languages have a standard variety, but that's kind of imposed, right? So what you learn as Arabic here at Purdue, if you take an Arabic, would be some standard form of Arabic. If you use that standard variety and go to an Arabic-speaking country and speak to someone who's not educated, probably you won't be able to communicate with each other. They wouldn't understand your elevated form, and you definitely wouldn't understand their form. Yeah. We have another question. Yeah.
In Egypt and Lebanon, because of how different the Egyptian Arabic and Lebanese Arabic were to standard, a lot of nationalists were actually thinking about labeling those languages not even as Arabic anymore, but just as Lebanese and as Egyptian. And even in Lebanon, it got a little more extreme to where they were even thinking about just dropping the Arabic script altogether and adapting Latin alphabet.
Yeah, I mean, because they really are so different. Yeah, they're all together under one label called Arabic. And why are they all together? You touched upon that. Because they all share the same writing system. They all share the Arabic script, which creates the impression that even though you have all this kind of spoken diversity on the page, it's kind of standardized. Okay. And then, of course, there are lots of cultural issues with that too. So, an example perhaps closer to home. German, when you learn German at an institution like Purdue, you learn what's called High German, Hochdeutsch, which is also a problematic term. Linguists often prefer the term Modern Standard German, because High German isn't always Standard German. But what I'm trying to get at is what you learn as kind of Standard German, Modern Standard German, is not necessarily what everybody's speaking in a German-speaking country. And this is kind of imposed on people in a school setting because everyone wants everyone to speak some sort of standard. Yet at home, everyone speaks differently. Okay, so there are lots of different varieties just within Germany, different dialects of German. And again, you would think that because they're dialects, that they're just kind of variations of the same language. Okay, yet if you take someone from North Germany speaking what's called Low German, and you get them to speak with someone from Switzerland, okay, which is what's considered High German, and they only speak in their dialect, so they don't use Modern Standard German, what you learn at Purdue, they really don't understand each other. Okay, yet we kind of lump them all together and we say that they speak a German dialect, okay, which would suggest that they understand each other, yet they don't. Okay.
To kind of contribute to that I, as someone who studied German, feel like I have a better chance at understanding Dutch than I would at Bavarian German, much less Swiss German.
Yeah, and there's so many factors that go into standardization. So some of the features that exist in Standard German are kind of features that are taken from all over and kind of lumped together. Low German is actually where English comes from. We'll talk a little bit about that throughout the course of the semester. Okay, so conclusive statements. What is considered to be a language and a dialect is not as simple as mutual intelligibility. That's kind of a very objective way of analysing what is a language. Okay, high mutual intelligibility, dialects of the same language. Low mutual intelligibility, different languages. And that would be great if we could all follow that definition. Then of course we have lots of political, cultural, and historical issues that all kind of contribute to our conception of what is a language and a dialect. So it's more of a socio-political question rather than a linguistic one. Now, this individual wrote a book called The American Language, when America became independent from Britain. And because they became independent, there were people who wanted to call American English, North American English, American. Okay? And it's not that Americans speak so different to all the other varieties of English, even though there are some differences. It was a political decision. Okay? It's saying, hey, we're our own country, so we should have our own language. Going back to that quote by Max Weinreich, the language is a dialect of a Navian common. Noah Webster, which you're probably all very much familiar with Webster's dictionary. So, one of the reasons why American spelling is so different to British spelling, you may ask yourself, what's going on? Like, who's right or who's wrong? There's no right or wrong, really, but what happened is we had the British spelling, and then someone like Noah Webster said, hey, we should spell things differently. Now, he said that we should spell things differently based on pronunciation. Okay, which is why you have a word like colour in American English, which is not spelled with the U, okay, because the U isn't really pronounced. Although we did borrow that word from French, so couleur, where we had the U. Okay? So that's why British English maintains a lot of these spellings, and American English doesn't. And it moves towards the kind of phonetic way of spelling something. Okay, so there's kind of two views when you spell something. In terms of standardization, you have kind of the historical view. We should spell something this way because historically it used to be like that. And then there's the kind of phonetic view, which is we should spell things how we write, how we speak, sorry. Okay, so if we pronounce it that way, we should represent it that way. And in American English, it's kind of moved towards that. But suffice it to say that this was a political decision, okay? People like Webster wanted Americans to be different, okay? So politically different, politically independent, so we should also have our own. Some of these make sense, some of these examples like colour, but there are some kind of ridiculous examples like have. H-A-V-E was supposed to be H-A-V. Okay, they proposed to get rid of the E. Okay, so phonetically speaking, we don't pronounce the E anymore, so why did we spell it with the E? And some of these stuck and some of them didn't. Okay. And eyes, like American eyes, I-Z-E, we spell it that way because, well, Americans spell it that way because you pronounce it that way. But historically we spelled it with S. Good, so to summarize, what is a language and what is a dialect? Just to kind of bring everything together. So we have kind of a linguistic view and we have a kind of a political, realistic view. So what would be, you ask a linguist what is a language and a dialect, looking at mutual intelligibility, what would be the difference? When you have high mutual intelligibility, so you understand each other, you speak dialects of the same language, and you kind of can think of it as like a hierarchy. You have a language which consists of lots of different dialects. And if you can't understand each other, so low mutual intelligibility, you speak a different language. Okay? Yet in reality, we've seen that it's not as simple as that. So politics and culture and religion and all these things kind of shape what we consider today, what we accept to be a language. Any questions? So we've already kind of touched upon this. We all speak differently. The idea that everybody speaks the same is just really a fallacy. We all speak differently, even on an individual level. So we all have different idiolects. And then we all have different sociolects. So again, lect just means the way of speaking. So idiolects at the individual level. Everyone here speaks differently. Even if you were brought up in the same household and everything. There are always individual differences. You might share a geographical variety, but there's still going to be individual differences. And even within an individual, you have what's called a sociolect. So you change the way that you speak according to the social situation. Okay, you wouldn't swear in an interview, okay, but you might swear with some of your friends or something like that, right? The way that you speak changes. Okay? And we all do this automatically. It's sometimes not even conscious. We're not even aware of it. But we change automatically, depending on the person with whom we're speaking. And of course we have regiolects, so the dialects of Indiana could be considered a regiolect, so geographical differences. And all these are varieties of the same language, okay? Assuming that everyone can still understand each other and mutual intelligibility is high, they're all really varieties of the same language. Now this is a really, really important point to raise. Even though we have what's considered a standard, on a linguistic level, all these different varieties which exist are linguistically equal. Okay? Someone from Texas speaks in a certain way, someone from Indiana speaks in a certain way. And we might have judgments about which one's better based on our view of society and politics and various issues. Linguistically speaking, they're all equal. Okay, so that's a really important point to take away. Question? Okay, so what is a standard? Okay, when we talk about standard English, how do we get a standard? Well, imagine you have 500 different varieties. Honestly, it's as simple as this. It's a political decision. Imagine you have 50 pieces of candy in a bag, and you literally just put your hand in, you pull one out, and you say, this is the one that's going to be the standard. This is the candy that I'm going to eat. It's honestly as simple as that. Okay? All the candy are the same, yet you just pick one and you say, this is the one. Okay? However, it often happens very frequently, the people who decide what is a standard, it happens to be the way that they speak. Okay, so if we had to come up with a standard Indiana English, whoever's from Indiana would say, oh, I speak this way, so this is going to be the standard. Okay? So often the people who are in political power, those are the people who choose what is a standard. Okay? But again, that's a political decision, not a linguistic one. So if we take a language like English, there are so many different dialects or varieties. I use the term variety. Sociolinguists, people who look at the interaction between language and society, prefer the term variety. Any idea why why sociolinguists might prefer the term variety over dialects? They really mean the same thing, but
one of them isn't as politically charged as the other.
Perfect, yeah. So when you ask people, even hear the word dialect, people kind of think, oh, it's some sort of, it's inferior in some way, okay? But variety is just neutral. Now in linguistics, dialects is also neutral, but still nonetheless people have this, it has this connotation. So you can think about all these different varieties and you just pick one as the standard. And that's what happened with different standard varieties of English. So there are lots and lots of varieties of English spoken in Great Britain. You've met lots of British people, you know some people speak differently. Okay, and well, maybe you think that everyone speaks the same, but it's not really true. People from different regions speak completely in such a diverse way. So, for example, we have what is called Standard English, often called Standard British English, like RP English. You maybe heard this term. Capital R, capital P. It's called received pronunciation, often thought of as Queen's English or BBC English. That's what's kind of our standard today, although it's not. It's kind of changing a little bit. So the Queen's English is not actually really the standard of today. At least historically, that was the aim. That was the goal. Yet we have all these different regions, okay, that people speaking differently within the UK. Okay. So my dialect of English was Yorkshire English. I come from Leeds, which is spoken, which is in the north of England. Okay, and around Leeds are lots of Yorkshire dialects. Okay, and if I spoke in that dialect, I probably wouldn't understand. I had to learn to not speak that way. Okay, when I went to university, I realized that the way that I spoke in my vernacular, in my native dialect, was not a prestigious way of speaking. Okay, and then all this kind of social charge comes with that. Oh, this person comes from this region, so they're not very intelligent, things like that. And so I had to learn standard British English. And that's probably one of the reasons why we're able to communicate. Just as a quick question, who's been to the UK? Has anyone been to the UK? Okay, so where have we all been, and did you hear different ways of speaking? So let's start. Where did you go in the UK?
Honestly, it was a long time ago. I've been all around, but to school I went to meet teachers from I had multiple teachers from Scotland, some from different areas. And actually 2 days ago, one of my friends who is from southern England sent me a 7-minute voice note with him mimicking accents from all around.
Yeah, so there's so much linguistic diversity in the UK. So yeah, someone from Scotland, if they're not speaking standard English, you really would have a difficult time understanding them. So Scotland, whichever regions you've been to. Ireland, again, completely different. yeah, it's difficult if they're not speaking standard. And often what happens is people don't realise that they're not speaking standard. Okay, people don't travel; they're just speaking what's normal to them. So if you get someone, from Leeds, like my parents, who haven't travelled much, and they speak to an American, they think that they're just speaking, they're speaking standard English, but they're not, right? Even in the school system in the UK, you think that the teachers are speaking standard English, but if they haven't travelled, they're not really. They're just speaking the language of dialects that they've been brought up speaking. Okay, and I noticed this in multiple languages. When I went to Switzerland, so in Switzerland they speak Swiss German, which is not standard German, but that's kind of their native. It's one of many languages in Switzerland. But that's kind of the language that most people learn at home. And then when they go to school, they learn standard German, what they call Hochdeutsch, High German. And I went to do an experiment in Switzerland. I went to the school system. I went into the school system, and they were not speaking High German. They would say, "Yeah, we're speaking High German. We're speaking standard German," but they were not. Okay, so even that changes what people think to be a standard. It's not really always the standard. Okay, so we had Ireland, we had Scotland,
Oh, and Wales.
and
Ireland's
Wales.
not
I've been to Devon, I think it's like one of the southern provinces.
Okay.
And then I went to London.
Okay. And any other?
I've been to Birmingham.
Okay, and what are they called? I think they're called a Brummie. Someone from Birmingham. They speak. Did you have difficulty understanding them?
It was a little hard.
Yeah. I did my undergraduate degree in Liverpool, and in Liverpool they speak what's called Liverpudlian English, or natively what's called Scouse English, and they really, honestly, you would have a really difficult time understanding them. Okay, and they think that they're speaking standard English. Okay, so much diversity. So we have all these kind of native languages, native dialects spoken at home, and then everyone comes together, and in the school system we often say, okay, everyone's going to, you have all this diversity, but we're going to have a standard. Okay. And sometimes you're born in a region where that standard is from. Okay, so most standard British English comes from the geographical region of London. So typically, although it's changing now, people from the south were kind of considered to be posh. Okay, they spoke Queen's English. It just happens to be brought up in that area where that standard came from. Okay, whereas other people brought up in a different area, they have their native dialects, and then they have to learn this standard. And sometimes there's a huge difference between the two. Okay. So we've just talked really about English, but of course we can see the situation in various languages of the world. So who are our Spanish speakers or people learning Spanish? You probably notice so much diversity, even within a country like Spain, when they're supposed to speak one geographical variety. There's so much varieties. Okay? There's so many differences, and of course, European Spanish is different to Latin American Spanish. What other languages do we have? We had.
I was just going to ask, do you actually know why, at least one of the big theories, as to why Latin Americans don't Fifea?
Yeah. So, I believe, so even within Spain, not everyone pronounces, so Tetheo, in Spain they have the incidental fricative, which is the TH sound in English, I think, and thought. Most languages actually don't have that, but Spanish is one of them, and so is English. And in Spain, in standard European Peninsular Spanish, they have that. Yet, of course, if you go to Latin America, you realize that we don't have that. But even within Spain, people in the south don't really use that, and it's supposed, people hypothesize at least, that the people who originally went and colonized in Latin America were the people who didn't have that. But, so they had some instead. So I think that's kind of the mainstream.
Yeah, it's on those, the whole.
Yeah. Good. So, what I want you to do quickly is to think of some features of American English, which are notably different. Okay, so different varieties. Maybe you come from Indiana, maybe you come from Texas, maybe you come from California. And what are some, let's focus on phonological differences, so sound differences, and lexical differences. Okay, so I'm going to give you a minute or two. Discuss with the person next to you. If someone comes from California, they speak this way. Or what is characteristic of a Californian dialect or Texan dialect? Okay, so I'll give you a minute or so.
Yeah, where are you from? Actually, where are you It's like
Oh, so we're going to have some differences. Well, so you're not from here. So when you came here, what did you know? So what would be characteristically different?
Oh, this is how you know this. You've got
Oh yeah. That's like any what do you call it on top of the house?
Yeah, how do you describe it?
We've got like this
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. Like, I've never seen it. It's really silly, but what do you call like you're in an intersection and like round shape?
Yeah, you can actually draw on that.
Yeah, same.
You can draw a map and you can say this is where they say so, this is where they say so. I guess so. These are called isoglossals. It's where you can draw a line and say over here they say this, over here when you cross over this line. You can actually do that for lots of people. Fantastic. So, what are some characteristic features of different American, North American?
So this one's kind of different. Like a lot of people don't know about this, but I'm from like a small town in Indiana, and we call like real cheese like cheese toasties.
Okay.
And like only a select few people I've met that live close to me like use that term.
Interesting. That's what we say in British English too. Yeah.
Oh,
Cheese
really?
toasties, yeah. Interesting. Okay. So lexical differences, and I suppose if everyone else had never heard that before, what on earth is it? Cheese toasty.
Where I'm from in southern Indiana, if you go like a little bit past, a little west of where I live, the difference could be wash or wash,
I've heard this multiple times, yeah.
or shrimp or shrimp.
So there are some phonological differences, some sound differences, the way that the sounds interact with each other.
Yeah, one of the bigger ones I've seen in English is leg versus leg, or egg versus egg.
Okay, so kind of lengthening the vowel a little bit.
She says egg.
Yeah. Boy,
Bouncing off that, I'm originally from Alabama, and that I've learned to speak differently because people like, made fun of me and didn't understand how I was speaking. So we really elongate the vowels in all of our consonants so much softer. And then, like, one of the lexical differences is instead of shopping cart, it's called a buggy.
Oh, very good. Any other?
I feel like people from the South, just certain words are a little different, like calling your mom mama versus mom.
Okay.
I feel like here we don't really do that once you're an adult, whereas in the South, like my mom still calls my mom mama, or her mom mama, even though she's a 60-year-old.
Great. So we touched a little bit on, by talking about what a language and a dialect is, this is kind of the work of a sociolinguist, and I wanted to kind of introduce this now, because I think this is conceptually important to understand as the course develops. But we will have a couple of classes towards the end of the semester devoted to sociolinguistics, the interaction between language and society. These sorts of things that we talked about are really kind of the work of sociolinguists. You cannot often, it's Owen, right? I was speaking to Owen, and you can draw, even within America, you can take a map of America and you can draw different lines, which are called isoglosses. And you can say, over here they say pop, over here they say coke, over here they say soda. And you can actually mark that on a map and draw a line. Okay, and these are called isoglosses, and we'll talk a little bit